I'm joined now by Mark Graham, an ecologist from the Nature Conservation Council in New South Wales in Australia. Mark, good to have you with us. You've been involved in fighting fires in the Gondwana rainforest, a World Heritage Site in New South Wales. What's the situation there?
Thankfully, in our region, the situation has eased somewhat. We've managed to prevent fire entering significant areas of some of the finest and most ancient forests on the planet. There has been loss, there has been damage to these World Heritage listed areas, but thankfully at this stage, large blocks, the intact cores of these most remarkable conservation reserves are mostly intact.
Well, it's good to have some good news there, of course. Sorry, do carry on.
Yes, I was just going to say that we've been comparatively fortunate when compared to so many other areas in the southeast of Australia. We've, I guess because these are amongst the moistest of forests, the wettest of all rainforests, the very dense cores of these rainforests we've managed to prevent fire getting through them. Elsewhere in Australia, however, the fires have been so extensive that they've literally left no refuges, which means that so much of our globally unique wildlife has either suffered direct mortality with the fire front or now have no homes and no food available. This situation has played out across such a massive swathe of southeastern Australia that there are very real fears that extinctions have already occurred and that there are likely to be ongoing declines in some of our most remarkable wildlife species.
Well, as you say, I mean, it's difficult to comprehend the scale of the destruction. We're hearing that some species could be completely wiped out and that koalas in particular have been impacted.
That's true. So all of or most of the strongholds of the koala have suffered some fire. Some of the largest koala populations, such as on Kangaroo Island, have suffered immense impact. There were some 50,000 koalas on Kangaroo Island. It's highly likely that over half of them have already died. And yesterday and today, the fires have been really quite catastrophic once more down on Kangaroo Island and in parts of the southeast of Australia. So one of our national iconic animals is suffering quite badly. There's a lot of animals that are in care. Hopefully those animals will be able to be rehabilitated and released back to the wild. There are a host of other quite remarkable fauna species, such as the brush-tailed rock wallaby, which is an absolutely astonishing and incredibly cute small wallaby that lives on cliff lines. Most of its populations have suffered extreme damage, and the problem is that in the aftermath of these fires, the animals that remain have no food and no shelter, and they're often very vulnerable to being eaten by vertebrate pests. So feral animals, cats and foxes that were introduced to Australia come in and clean up the animals or eat the animals that remain after the fire. So just because the fires stop doesn't mean that the impacts are over, and this situation will be playing out in the months and potentially the years to come across so much of southeastern Australia.
We've been seeing photos as you're speaking of some of those animals, kangaroos and other animals, burnt to death. Just utterly heartbreaking, the images there. We are also hearing some amazing stories of communities pulling together and extraordinary bravery by volunteer firefighters. What are you seeing out there?
Absolutely. Through this rolling crisis, this unprecedented crisis, what is the most heartening and positive, or amongst the most heartening and positive things happening, is that communities are binding together and they're looking after one another and they're acting to protect properties and lives, and they're acting to protect nature. Now, through some of the work that we've been doing in northern New South Wales, we've managed to prevent fire entering these, as I'd said earlier, these most ancient of forests on the face of the planet. They literally are forests that have lineages tens to hundreds of millions of years of age, in that they're largely unchanged since before the dinosaurs became extinct. And some of these areas have burnt entirely through, and that is a global tragedy. But all sorts of community members have banded together and have worked very, very hard to protect these forests. And there's been quite some considerable success. And I guess we're all just more than anything hoping that rainfall will return. These areas are amongst the wettest parts of the Australian continent, and rainfall has practically stopped in recent years. And this is a direct consequence of climate chaos, global warming, climate breakdown. Forests that have never been dry enough to burn are now absolutely dry enough to burn. Rivers that have never stopped flowing have absolutely stopped flowing. And all of the aquatic species that live within them, such as our remarkable platypus, have been completely removed from those areas. Major rivers, major water supply catchments are no longer flowing. And this has flow-on consequences for the most populated areas of Australia. So in particular, Sydney and Melbourne's key water supply areas have been very extensively burnt, and that creates immediate impacts upon water quality. So ash and sediment washing into the streams creates major problems for the water quality. But longer term, because so much of the bushland has burnt, there is a loss of flow in these catchments because there has been a massive reduction in biomass, in organic material within these catchments. And on top of historically unprecedented drought conditions, we're likely to now have ongoing reductions in flow. And that affects agriculture, fisheries, and of course all the people who live within our towns and cities who require those municipal water supplies. So
now, Mark, you mentioned there about climate change, and there's been anger, hasn't there, at the government's response, refusal to recognise the role of climate change. We're seeing demonstrations taking place today. What's your take on that?
They're absolutely well placed, and our government has utterly failed to do anything to protect our future. They've actually hit the accelerator at a time when we need to hit the accelerator toward the brick wall of climate chaos by being the world's largest coal exporter, massively expanding coal exports, massively expanding gas exports, and doing absolutely nothing to reduce our nation's emissions. If anything, our nation's emissions have increased.